A cold breeze blew through my bedroom window. I sat up in my bed, still half asleep. The tree out front had completely shed its leaves, the onset of winter. Seeing the cold creeping in put a smile on my face. Business was about to boom. I dragged myself downstairs to get on with my day, stopping by the kitchen on my way. A carton of milk and 3 boiled eggs. I loaded the peeled eggs onto my plate and went to town. After getting my meal over with, I went down to the basement where I stored my weapons. I had to run a status check, and if necessary, stock up on more supplies. You see, winter is usually when a lot of monster species go to bed for a few months in North America. Most reptilian and mammalian menaces are either inactive or burrowed in caves. Through the months of October to January, most commonly known as the American Bigfoot, they dwindle in numbers before resurging in spring. Studies have shown that these swamp-dwelling amphibious frog gators burrow in mud through most of the dry season. And while winter certainly reduces the diversity of catch for us hunters, it is by no means a slow period. Winter is when the big bad of North America comes out to play. Winter is the Wendigo season. This time of the year is busiest for us hunters, all thanks to this ancient, ice-cold apex predator of these snowing lands. The moment the October heat passes by, I get flooded with calls and job offers, and this year I got quite the call indeed. On the wall furthest from the stairs were 7 gun lockers. I took out a Remington from the second. Seemed alright. There were about 2 boxes of rounds on the shelf. In the first locker sat my crossbow. I had to get the string replaced. The other rifles were in good condition for the most part. I opened up the 6th locker. There it was, sitting on the top shelf. My shotgun. The shotgun. My family's magnum opus. I still had 20 rounds of the high-X tungsten slugs. Good enough for this season, I guess, considering it only takes 1 to finish the job. I remembered my injuries from the first time that I used this thing earlier this year. I shuddered at the thought. I wanted to avoid using this thing for this year at least. I headed to my truck. I was going to have to go down to Barron's, a local dealer who also supplies special equipment to hunters in my area. I was instructed to meet up with the old man to collect specially sanctioned supplies for my up-and-coming job. As I was heading towards the stairs, I stopped by the last locker. I opened it up. Inside was a black leather trench coat. A deer skull was printed on its back in white. The sight of it brought back a lot of memories from the time when I was training at the academy. I took the coat upstairs and threw it beside my suitcase. I was going to need it anyway. I put the keys in and gave it a twist. She started right up, purring gently at idle. I drove down the freeway, pondering over that phone call. The first Wendigo-related call for this season, and it's something quite unique. I am tasked to capture one alive. Yes, alive. I didn't believe it at first. It's not that live capture hasn't been done before. Successful capture and containment has been performed 3 times in the past. 2 were bagged straight from the wilderness, while 1 was quite literally made and raised in captivity. A private-funded study permitted subjecting a living, breathing human to the Wendigo curse, in order to transform the said subject and observe the stages of transformation. It's pretty messed up. Definitely some sort of violation. But it is a far cry from the worst of the atrocities committed in the name of science. Wendigos are without question one of the top 3 worst monsters in North America, if not the worst. They aren't natural beings. All of them were once humans who were influenced by the Wendigo curse. A curse is a spiritual influence from a metaphysical entity. In this case, the curse of the Wendigo was embodied within a spiritual entity that finds its roots in the heart of the native lands. Dr. Houses was the first to document the manifestation of the curse in a living specimen in 1962. This curse begins to take effect from psychological triggers, particularly when the victims are put in extreme conditions of starvation or greed. Should the subject indulge in exploitation against their own ethical conscience under these conditions of extreme stress, most usually acts of cannibalism and murder, they undergo several morphological and psychological changes. Induced psychosis causes paranoia and insatiable hunger to set in. Bodily changes begin after a week of the trigger. Complete body hair loss followed by the subsequent replacement by extremely thin sensory hairs. Loss of body fat and emaciation of the body. Increased bone density by 400%. Reactivation of growth plates causing the elongation of limbs. Strengthening of fast twitch muscle fibers all around the body. Posture changes and elongation of metatarsals, replacing the human plantigrade foot with a digigrade foot. The skin darkens to resemble ash gray and black. Nails turn into black claws and the teeth are replaced with sharp canine daggers. Eyes the ash white of death, with dark black sclera. The ears elongate. The jaws protrude for a larger bite. The cheeks tear, revealing the rows of teeth in the cartilage-based nose. It disappears as the nasal bone elongates and raises up. The result is a humanoid creature that prowls the taiga and boreal forests of the north relentlessly, searching for flesh to consume. They don't bother killing, they'll eat you alive. They'll lure you, track you down, and tear you apart. And you'll be there to witness all of it firsthand. I drove down the desolate road towards my dealer's property. After a 25-minute drive, I pulled up at a store. The usual old man was seated at the register, lighted cigarette in hand. "Myers," he said, acknowledging my presence. I walked towards the register. "How you doing, old man?" I asked. He took a long puff of his cigarette. "They've got quite the goods for you, Myers." "Yeah, winter's here. I would like a nice and comfy coat," I replied with a smile. Baron rose from his seat. "Oh, you're gonna love this," he said in his rugged voice. He led me to the back of the store through a big metal door. Mr. Baron is a trusted arms and equipment dealer. He, along with many others across the world, helps supply us hunters with the tools for the job. Trust me when I say that times were a lot rougher in this trade before technological advancements found their way into the uncanny hunting business. Nowadays, you commonly see stuff like RS imaging, sonar, radar, mana sensors, and proximity alarms being used in the field. You find all sorts of wacky tech at the dealer shops. Baron led me to the warehouse out back. I walked down an aisle with racks 10 feet high on either side. They were stocked with all sorts of goods wrapped up in plastic packaging. I noticed a drone towards the end of the aisle. I pushed aside the packaging and took out the instruction sheet. As I was fiddling with the paper, Baron waddled up to me, dragging a wooden crate. I stood in front of it as he opened it up. Inside the crate were 3 metallic devices. They were in the shape of hexagonal prisms, 25 centimeters wide. The vertices were smooth and not pointy. The top had a handle which was attached to a circular mechanism underneath. The device was around 20 centimeters in height and was bisected in the middle. Connecting rods extended perpendicularly from these 6 vertices, connecting the top and bottom. "What is this?" I asked. It may sound stupid, but the R&D decided to call it an Antivoicer." "Antivoicer?" I asked. "It apparently counteracts the voices of the forest." I picked up the device by its handle. It was about 12 kilos. The trickiest thing about hunting Wendigos is dealing with their most terrifying ability, the voices of the forest. Sounds like a generic name, but it's truly horrifying. You all probably know that Wendigos can mimic voices. That is true, but it's only a fraction of what they're truly capable of. Wendigos can generate low-frequency sounds that cause hallucinations. They might cause you to hear the voice of a loved one. Maybe your backyard suddenly has one more bush than usual. Maybe you're trying to track your way back home from a hike on the trail, but the forest and landscape seem unrecognizable. If a Wendigo gets too close to you, it can directly gaze deep into your soul and make the hallucinations even more severe. You see where this is going. The Wendigo will use any trick it desires to lure you closer to its jaws. The hallucinations are very simple, obviously due to the fact that an insane ravenous beast can only have so much imagination and creativity in manifesting auditory and visual stimuli. It employs basic elements of the cold forest and alters your perspective of your environment, both auditory and visual. When you're out in the wild, there's no chance of noticing that you're being baited. I held the device in my hand. After reading the instructions, I twisted the handle anti-clockwise. This released the latch on the bottom. I grabbed the bottom and pulled it from the top. The rods extended a foot before locking. Between the vertices at the center was a glass cylinder with a small black pyramid amplifier. 2 black wires extended from the top and bottom towards the center. I set it down on the ground. I could feel the very faint tingle in my body. It uses signal interference to cancel out the wave frequencies emitted by those idiots. This is just a Phase 1 prototype though. Its range of protection is up to 150 meters tops. Effects drop off with distance. I put the device back into the crate. So this mission was also a field test for the prototypes, I thought to myself. As I grabbed the crate, Baron beckoned me over. One last thing, Myers. Your little trip is being sponsored. By who? I asked. 30 hours later, I was on a helicopter ride through the Yukon Territory. Sitting beside me were Anawan and Emily. These two were one of the best hunters of Canada. Just last year alone, they've successfully managed to take down over 80 Wendigos. Being seated beside 2 masters of the art, I felt a bit nervous about my performance. Emily tossed me a rifle. I examined it, and on the right side of the barrel, in matte black finishing, was the word Dragonfire. This was a whole new line of rifles to be tested in this mission. The manufacturers, who will remain anonymous, partnered up for this mission so that they could get field data for their newly developed weapons. Apparently the rounds have a capsule of napalm around the tips. They burn red hot when fired. The technician who gave us the demo told us that the bullets literally melt through their targets. And as you know, there's only 2 ways to kill a Wendigo: burn it to death or destroy its heart. The helicopter hovered over the treetops as the 3 of us rappelled down to the ground. Supply crates were dropped. The 3 of us took inventory of our supplies. We were ready. I looked around us. The green conifers were topped with the white of snow. Patches of rocky terrain were scattered around the snowy carpet of the forest floor. The pristine mountain ranges far to the west captivated me. The Canadian wilderness is truly a sight to behold. The cold breeze swept over my heavy coat. I grabbed 2 of the 4 crates. For now, Anawan was taking the lead. He was an expert at tracking. My job was more killing-oriented. Sensors in Sector 76 picked up movement 2 hours ago. Camera footage revealed it to be a large male grizzly bear. Grizzly? I asked. Yeah, but there's a catch. Anawan turned to me. Its left forelimb was torn clean off. You could see the broken head of the humerus jutting out of the wound, not to mention the 4 deep gashes across its torso. Right on the money, Emily said. You said the bear was moving northeast in the footage, right? Yeah, that's correct. Which means our friend should be at the border of Sector 77 right about now. We should check the caverns on the northern hills of 77, Emily suggested. There's a good possibility that we might find some leads there. It's the only cave system in a 15-kilometer radius. If this Wendigo has been settling here for a few days, it's probably sought shelter there. We traveled east for 4 hours. Our goal was to get to a specific clearing that Emily and Anawan knew about. We would have a clear view of the cave entrances if we set up there. We were about 1 kilometer away from the clearing when Emily raised her hand, signaling for us to stop. I instinctively lifted my rifle, ready to shoot at any possible threats. Anawan pointed to the ground. Tracks, 45 centimeters in length, 30 in width, 4-toed digigrade. This indicates that the Wendigo had been fully transformed. The footprint was massive. This specimen was definitely one of the larger ones. The tracks seemed to lead off into the trees. We decided not to follow them for now. We headed towards the massive clearing. It was less than 8 kilometers wide. Towards the south, the trail led to a small lake. Up north were rocky hills, and I took out my binoculars. Up in the hills were 3 small caves. I could see them just above the treetops. This was a good spot. One of the best ways to kill a Wendigo is to enter its territory, and then wait for it to come to you. And trust me, it'll come to you. It always does. It seeks only to hunt and consume. Its appetite will lead it to us. We set up one large tent and unloaded our supplies. I stood guard at the front of the tent. The clearing was completely empty, like a blanket of snow. Gentle winds blew through our campsite. It felt calm, a bit too calm. That wasn't a good sign. One of the noticeable symptoms of the influence of the voices of the forest was a feeling of tranquility. A stressed-out victim is less likely to play into a Wendigo's trap. For ages, hunters across the north would bite their tongues or pinch themselves every few seconds to keep themselves in the moment. The technique usually works with the average Wendigo. However, some specimens are too adept at using the voices. This is what makes them so dangerous. Not a lot of hunters would subject themselves to the position the 3 of us were in right now. But here we were, and here we would have to make a stand. I quickly went back inside the tent. "It's too calm," I said. The 2 of them immediately understood. Each of us grabbed an Antivoicer. The plan was to create a safe perimeter by planting the devices in a triangular formation. Anawan and Emily began walking to either side of our campsite. I walked straight ahead. Since the range of the devices was 150 meters, that meant that I would have to walk at least 280 meters north to ensure the optimum overlap. I walked towards the tree line in front of our camp. I heard the hoot of an owl. I froze dead in my tracks and I looked around. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. I had to walk around 200 meters more to get to the planting spot, right next to an old, singular withered tree in the middle of the clearing. I slowly made my way towards the tree ahead. All the while, the hoots of the owls persisted. As I got closer to the spot, I noticed that the owls seemed to be on all sides of the clearing, just beyond the tree line. I was getting closer to the tree. 150 meters, 100 meters. I heard comms from Anawan and Emily. "AV1 planted, AV2 planted." Emily's voice came through my earpiece. "Waiting on you, Maya." The comms were cut out by static. I was getting interference. It could be because of the devices, I didn't know for sure. I would have to relay this information to the technicians after getting back. 50 meters from the tree, 25. The owls cheered me on and I kept looking around, trying to pinpoint the direction of them. 10 meters away from the tree, I stopped. I held the Antivoicer in my hands. Twisting the handle anti-clockwise, I heard the latch release. I pulled the top and bottom away from each other, revealing the amplifier mechanism. I could hear a low hum as the device powered up. A blue LED light began blinking on the top console. As I put the device on the ground, listening to these startup beeps, I remembered something. The first time we had entered the clearing, I clearly remembered thinking to myself, the clearing is completely empty, like a blanket of snow. The device was up and running, but I didn't dare move a muscle.
Myers,
Anawan's voice spoke to me through the earpiece.
don't move.
I slowly lifted my head in the direction of the withered tree. Staring back at me were the ash-white eyes of death. The creature was massive. It was definitely 10 feet tall. The Wendigo tilted its head. I could smell the pungent odor of rotten flesh. It and I both knew that I wasn't falling for its BS anymore. The Wendigo slowly opened its jaws. Its lips and cheeks were torn to reveal the full extent of its teeth. It let out a low growl. I turned tail and ran. I sprinted straight back to the campsite. I heard an ear-piercing screech from behind me, followed by rampant, maniacal thuds. It was giving chase. I needed to get close to the campsite so my colleagues could intercept the Wendigo. I heard the Wendigo gaining on me. I couldn't give up. I kept running with all my might. I heard somebody shout my name, and that was my cue. With one last stride, I dove to my right, trying to get out of the Wendigo's path. I heard loud gunshots just ahead. They were shooting at it. I got back to my feet. The Wendigo was only a few meters away, but now it focused its attention on the other two. I ran back to the campsite and I could hear the firefight outside. They were trying to hold their ground. I quickly ran to the fourth crate and opened it. Bingo. I ran back outside and I joined the fight. Both Emily and Anawan were firing rounds into the beast. The wounds on the Wendigo were glowing red. It had burns on its torso and limbs. Despite its injuries, the Wendigo didn't show any signs of retreat. The bullets were just pissing it off even more. It charged at Anawan, who was caught reloading. I aimed at the beast and shot at its domed head. It didn't penetrate the skull, however. I stared at the monster once again and it slowly turned to face me. Letting out a roar, it leaped at me with incredible speed. I dropped my rifle and unharnessed the 5-foot-long Dragonfire railgun on my back. I flipped the switch and took aim. A loud whine came out from the weapon. The barrel glowed a bright orange. The Wendigo lifted its arm to take a swing at me. I aimed at its shoulder and pulled the trigger. A loud blast rippled through the clearing. The bullet tore through the joint of the shoulder. The Wendigo's arm fell to the ground. It was blown clean off. Perfect. This was the only way that we would have to capture this thing. Blow off all its limbs and then airlift it to containment before it regenerates. Call for evac, Emily said. We'll be finished by the time they get here. We have to get this thing into a cell before it gets its claws back. The Wendigo stumbled back. It looked furious and it glared at me. It was going to charge again. The railgun needed a full minute to recharge. I couldn't immediately reuse it. I grabbed the rifle on the ground. Anawan unsheathed a sword. I looked at him as he pressed a button on the handle of the black blade. He dragged his finger along the blade. The edge began glowing red hot. Is that Dragonfire too? I asked him. No, he said. Just a hand-me-down from my brother. I took aim at the creature. It charged. I tried to shoot its eyes out, but it was moving too fast. It jumped at me. I tried to jump out of the way, but it swiped at me. I fell to the ground hard. The creature lost its balance and fell beside me. I rolled away as the creature was getting back on its feet. It roared in malice. The thing's jaws were 8 feet away when I saw Anawan running at full speed with a red-hot sword. With a single decisive swing, he sliced through the Wendigo's left leg. A clean cut. The beast fell once again. Get the net, Anawan called. Emily loaded the steel cable net into its launcher. Anawan and I both took a few steps back as she fired the net at the creature. The cable wound around the creature. It howled in rage, frantically looking around for its next prey. Unfortunately, all it saw were 3 hunters. Emily shot out its left eye. I ran towards the railgun. It should have been done charging by now. The sound of metal screeching made me look back. The Wendigo had managed to push its left arm through the net. Dark blood was trickling down onto the snow below. With one arm free, the Wendigo lashed at Anawan. He fell hard onto his back. The Wendigo wriggled towards him, swiping at him with its elongated arms. I grabbed the railgun and tried to flick the switch. Nothing happened. Dang it, it's not done charging, I thought to myself. Suddenly, I heard a scream from behind me. I looked back to see the Wendigo's claw hooked onto Anawan's leg. It pierced his skin, leaving a deep gash. The snow was colored with the Wendigo's and Anawan's blood. It started dragging him closer. I kept fiddling with the switch, hoping that it'll charge up at any second. I didn't want any human casualties. Amidst the blood-curdling screams of Anawan, I heard a gunshot. The Wendigo roared once again. Emily had shot at the eye socket of the Wendigo. It reeled back, releasing its grip. With his only working leg, Anawan rolled ahead and raised his arms above his head. He mustered up all of his remaining strength and screamed at the top of his lungs. The blade of his sword cut through the arm of the Wendigo. I flipped the switch again, and the railgun began humming. Emily and Anawan started moving away from the Wendigo as I aimed for its neck. I pulled the trigger. The mighty spear of God pierced the devil's neck. The forest was illuminated by the railgun's magnificent flare. The Wendigo's head fell to the ground with a loud thud. It was blown clean off. The entire cervical spine was destroyed. Its body twitched, trying to free itself from the net. There was a gaping cavity where the neck should have been. The head lay motionless on the ground, jaws shut tight. The Wendigo had fallen. I sat down, letting out a sigh of relief. It was over. We had finished the mission. Without its head, the Wendigo can't function. It'll be a few hours before it regenerates its limbs again, after which it'll look for its head and reattach it to the main body. I walked up to Anawan, who was lying on the ground. His wound was still bleeding. I helped Emily administer first aid. We wrapped up his leg in an attempt to stop the bleeding for now. Off in the distance, I could hear a helicopter approaching. I went inside the tent to retrieve a flare. The extraction team was here. Anawan should be able to make it in time. The body was put into a reinforced cage. The threat was neutralized for now. It will have reached containment long before it could pose a threat. I strolled down the corridor of the facility. Anawan got emergency treatment just in time. They managed to save his leg. The Wendigo was put into a cell in time. From what I was told, it managed to butt its elbow joints just before being locked up. I stopped by the glass. Inside was a square room 25 meters wide and long. The walls were all white. Upon the white tiles of the floor was an elk carcass. Sitting right on top of it was our cannibal friend. It had completely healed all of its wounds. I watched as it tore through the poor elk with its brand new claws. As it was munching on its spleen, it slowly turned towards the glass. I met its gaze once again. I could feel the malice. It wanted to tear me to shreds. It hated me, and I knew it. I held its gaze for a while longer. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt my vision warp as a cold breeze blew around me. I didn't dare move. I felt a hand on my shoulders. I snapped out of my trance as a young man spoke to me. "Sir, you've been staring for 3 minutes. Are you all right?" I looked at the guy. He had a security uniform on. "Yeah, I'm all right. I'll just head home. It's been a long day." I told him as I began walking towards the exit. I was flown back home after receiving my paycheck. I went to the fridge and I pulled out a beer. I think I'm gonna take a break for a week or two. What I saw in that room, no, what the Wendigo showed me is a sight that I'll never forget. A cold breeze blowing over a desolate and snowy landscape. Through the blizzard, a family of 5 piled up on the ground. The 2 toddler twins dyed the snow red. The older adult sister twisted and mangled beyond recognition, all of her fingers bitten off. The father's entrails spilled out from deep gashes on his torso. Amidst the pile of corpses, a pale young starving girl, holding the decapitated head of her own mother completely covered in blood. The young girl slowly lifted her head, away from the mother's half-eaten cranium, staring directly into my eyes. The left eye was light brown, the right, the ash white of death. A crescent moon lay fixated in the night sky as these stars slowly frolicked past it. Even in absolute silence, they seemed to dance to a symphony unknown to mankind. "Hey, Dad," my 4-year-old self asked. "The rest of the stars changed their places after some time, but that star over there hasn't moved at all." I glanced to my right. My old man just stared up at the night sky. "Oh, that one. It's called the pole star. You know, it always points towards the north. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're lost at night and need to figure out directions, look up to the stars." I continued to stargaze for a while. It was one of the few occasions that we bonded over well into my adolescence. However, the tranquility of the moment was interrupted by a single beep. My dad bolted upright, glancing at his phone. He had a serious look on his face. Naturally, as any toddler would, I was frightened. "Dad?" I asked. "Is something wrong?" My father turned towards me and smiled. I was expecting words of reassurance. He spoke in a soft and gentle voice. "Something broke through the perimeter fence and triggered the motion sensors." His smile persisted. "Perhaps you should get inside and lock the doors. Take Brownie with you." That night I felt uneasy. We often had coyotes trespassing before, and Dad pretty much handled it by himself every single night. This time, however, it somewhat felt different. I saw a face in my dad that I had never seen before. While my dad rushed off to confront our intruder, I scrambled inside to secure the house. Even from a distance, I could hear the hysterical wails of the pigs from the barn. I was a bit worried about the livestock, so I grabbed a pair of binoculars that I had, and I aimed it at the barn. It was a fairly spacious structure with a patch of trees surrounding it from 2 sides. From my window, I could see the right side of the barn and the patch of trees which surrounded it from the back and left sides. The lights were off, yet the darkness radiated in an unsettling vibe. I scanned the area to no avail. Brownie, my German shepherd, paced frantically behind me. His nails clicked on the wooden floor, which reminded me to let Dad know of an impending nail-clipping session. As these seconds passed, I grew increasingly annoyed by the constant clattering. I started to turn around in hopes of calming him down. However, Brownie bolted towards the window and started growling. He had an aggressive yet nervous look on his face. I knew Brownie was too big of a wimp to confront whatever was out there, so I once again armed myself with the binoculars, and I scanned the barn for anything. There was nothing around the barn, but as I moved my gaze towards the patch of trees behind it, I noticed something moving within the trees. As it circled around the barn from the left, I got a good look at the creature. It was like a dog, a big one at that. Imagine a pit bull on steroids, or something along the lines of that. It was huge and bulky. It stood almost 4 feet at the shoulder. It had a broad snout with a fairly bulky muzzle. Initially, I was almost convinced that it was a boxer, at least based on its face. but something about it seemed completely off. Even as I stared at the beast with my own eyes, it felt as if it had no presence of its own. It felt like a mere projection prowling around. The coarse, black fur almost completely broke its outline. A few patches of bare gray skin spread across its torso. As it stalked to the side of the barn, the moon gave us just enough light to give out these minute details. The scariest part, however, was the pulsing black aura surrounding the beast. It had a fiery radiance to it. It seemed to emit the darkest of hues. I didn't dare move a muscle. I simply stared as the beast continued its way to the barn's entrance. It circled around the right wall and headed towards the door. It disappeared within the darkness, and the loud, distinct sound of shattering wood filled my ears. The thing broke through the barn doors. There were a few growls, and the pig's wails became even more desperate. And then everything seemed to die down. Not a single sound. Even the crickets seemed to have better things to do than chirping around. It was unsettling. 4-year-old me was overwhelmed by its presence. However, the pigs let out one last encore. In a single moment, everything spiraled down into chaos. Not just the pigs, but the chickens and even some of the sheep we kept started going absolutely berserk. The animals started letting out terrifying cries for help. The noises boomed across the field. I could hear some animals banging aggressively on the walls of the barn in a last-ditch attempt to escape the horror that had come for them. That dog didn't even let out a peep. It was like witnessing a ballad orchestrated by the god of death itself. I had no means of seeing what was going on within the barn, and frankly speaking, I didn't want to. I crouched down against my bedroom wall, not making a sound. All the while, Brownie lay right beside me. The screeches lasted no longer than 2 minutes. Dead silence prevailed afterwards. I looked up. The silence was like an alarm to me. I got up and peered out of the window, just in time to see that demonic dog carrying a pig's carcass with its mouth. It walked a few feet and rested the carcass down. The dog then went into high alert and started looking around, probably trying to see if anybody else was around. It didn't occur to me to duck down, and surely enough, the dog's gaze rested upon me. It had menacing red eyes. I gazed into its crimson ocular abyss. It stared back at me, and then it started growling. I froze up. The dog took a few steps towards me and let out a howl of pain. Just a moment later, I heard the familiar sound of a gunshot. The dog's hindquarters fell to the ground. Suddenly, another bullet struck its leg, followed by another gunshot. The dog let out an ear-piercing howl. It looked towards the fields that stretched out in front of the barn. I saw a figure walking towards the injured beast. As it drew closer, I could make out a few features. It was my dad. In his left hand was a giant halberd. The dog started growling again. My dad calmly walked towards the dog, axe in hand. The dog was furious. In a final outburst of carnage, the dog lunged at my father, who was a mere 3 meters away. A moment later, the beast's body was on the ground, its head severed, fallen a few feet to the right. I couldn't even keep up. I barely saw Dad raising the massive weapon, much less swinging it, and before I knew it, the demon dog was dead. I rushed outside towards my dad. "What was that?" I asked with a worried expression. My dad held a cold expression, his gaze akin to that of an emotionless killer. "A black shuck," he responded. "It's kind of a phantom dog." He walked towards the barn, and I followed closely. He stopped at the broken door. I wished that I had had time to cover my eyes, because nothing could prepare me for the slaughter within. The entire barn was covered in blood. A few bits of flesh and bone and internal organs were scattered across the room. In the center of it lay a pig's head. It had a look of sheer terror on its face. "Hey, Hugo," Dad spoke up. Tears burst out of my eyes as I looked towards him. He put his hand on my head. "Remember this well, boy. Monsters do exist." This story takes place in 2014, back when my dad was still alive, a time where I was getting fairly skilled at my profession. I was seated down thinking about those old times when the light in the cabin changed from red to green. The chopper slowed down a bit as it descended towards the ground. How did I even get here? 24 hours ago, I was at home enjoying my weekend. I was just about to head over to a friend's house when I got an email regarding an emergency assignment that I needed to attend to. Anyways, fast forward an entire day's worth of travel and preparations, and I was in Romania, flying over to some random ghost town with 2 hunters, Pearson and Mike. The chopper hovered close to the ground. Pearson was the first to drop onto the ground. I started gathering my equipment. I had brought along quite a bundle, and grabbing my huge sack, I jumped off the chopper and landed on the grass. The 3 of us gathered around as the chopper retreated. "All right, let's review our tasks once again," Pearson said, taking the lead. He pulled out his tablet and displayed a map of the town on its screen. "Right now, we have a perimeter set up all around the town's borders. According to the surveillance team, neither of them have left the area. Both of them are somewhere in the town. Now, the town is 2 clicks south from our position. Both of you will circle around from the west side. I'll find a vantage point to monitor the cameras around the perimeter and give you both a sniper support." I looked at Pearson. Based on his speech, I could tell that he wasn't very enthusiastic about storming the town himself. And to be honest, I could understand why. He continued. "Now here's a very important detail. There's a graveyard on the east side of town. Do not let them anywhere near it." He then turned the device in our direction so that we could see the screen. "Lastly, our targets. These 2 are the people behind the massacres occurring in this region. They've killed hundreds, so I guess you can imagine just how much blood they've drunk till now." I stared at the 2 faces on the screen. Even as photos, their unsettling gazes stared deep into my soul. "Vampires," I muttered under my breath. "This is going to be fun." After around 30 minutes of walking, me and Mike reached the outskirts of the locality while Pearson went off to find high ground. I crouched down behind a damaged section of the wall, probably the remains of some old house. To my right was a patch of small huts. To my left, an array of 2-story houses. After peeking around the wall, I could see a vast stretch of bricks and concrete. A small path led downwards into a trench, which directly connected the east and west ends of the town. And bridges were built over this path to connect the 2 halves. It was too dark to see far off into the area, so I pulled out my binoculars. The trench twisted and turned, making an asymmetrical division between the north and south sides of the town. On the other side of town, I saw what looked to be a small church. "You spotted the graveyard yet?" Mike whispered. "No, not yet. I can't get a visual," I said. The view from my position was pretty limited. I called in Pearson. "I need the cemetery's position."
The cemetery is on the northeast side of town near the edge. It's clear as of now. You see that main footpath connecting the town sides? It forks halfway in. Take the left path and you'll find yourself near the church. 150 meters behind it is the graveyard."
Pearson responded. "Roger that," I said. I turned to face Mike. "Right, now we're on the west side of town. Right across from us is the graveyard. We'll both circle around the edges, clearing houses on the way. No matter what, we gotta draw these 2 out." Mike nodded. Pearson's voice came through.
"We've got satellite imaging on the town and the cameras on the perimeter give us a complete visual. I'll call for any threats or signs of movement. If anyone enters the graveyard, I'll take them out. So both of you don't enter it."
Any other point of interest that we should check out? Mike asked.
Yes, there's a decent-sized mansion near the southeast edges. I highly suspect both of them are in there. Keep clearing ground until you've made it to the graveyard, then circle back towards the mansion. If they try to scram, either I or the mines at the perimeter we set up will get them. The rest is up to you,
Pearson stated. I looked at Mike. Needless to say, this was going to be one heck of a hunt. We went along with the plan. Michael circled around by the north section while I headed out towards the back alleys that ran parallel to the main pathway. There were buildings crammed together a few minutes in, and I was completely surrounded by darkness. I would have been easy picking if I didn't have my night vision goggles on. The buildings around me creaked ever so slightly as if they were mocking me. My finger pushed on my rifle trigger a bit harder. An unsettling presence filled the dark path. Within the dead silence, I could make out a few whispers. The voices grew in number. It felt like a choir of all the souls of this town that had been laid to waste. I stopped walking. The darkness seemed to threaten me against taking another step, all the while taunting me to move forward. I didn't dare move ahead. I just stayed in place waiting for something to happen, for something to leap out of the dark and tear me to shreds. That's why I almost jumped out of my skin when I heard a voice scream in my ear. I looked around in panic. However, nothing was there. I was completely alone. After I recovered from my initial shock, though, I realized the voice in my ear was still screaming. It was Pearson. It took me a second to comprehend what he said and to understand the danger that I was in. He said,
Get out from those buildings now, something's coming your way. Get onto the main pass so that I can give you sniper support.
My mind was having trouble processing the situation, but my body didn't hesitate. I turned to my left towards an alleyway that led straight towards the trench. As I started to run, I could hear the sound of rustling deep within the darkness. Not stopping for a second, I turned my head towards the path that I previously was heading down. There, clad in black, was the outline of something moving in the dark. It was humanoid in shape and had bright crimson eyes. It bolted straight towards me. I didn't dare look back. I hauled it out of there, heading out towards the pathway. As I was running away, I swear that I felt a hand almost grab my shoulder. If I hesitated even for a second, I probably wouldn't have been writing this. I didn't stop until I reached the pathway. The moment that I emerged from the alley, I felt a bullet fly right past my shoulder. A demonic howl of pain followed. It felt enraged and resentful. I turned around to face my pursuer, however there was nothing. It all happened so fast that I needed a moment to comprehend it. I called in on Pearson. "What the heck was that?" I asked.
Our suspect. It was definitely a vampire.
Suddenly I heard the rustling again. I looked back into the dark alleyway, but I could make out the same dark figure in the distance rushing towards me at full speed. I heard Pearson's voice come in.
Stay on the track and head straight for the graveyard. I'll keep him off of you.
I started sprinting once again. I heard another gunshot from Pearson's sniper, but I couldn't care less. Right now I had to secure the graveyard. I dashed through the dusty path. Houses zoomed past me as I made my way towards the cemetery. The road forked ahead of me and I turned left. It was quite a chore carrying my rifle. As I went down the curves of the path, I could see the church come into view. I sprinted straight past it onto the grass and dirt. I looked ahead and there it was. The cemetery. The gate was wide open. Given the situation, I didn't even bother being discreet with my entrance. I looked around the area. There were around 80 graves. Given the number of bodies, it was important to secure this area, especially since we were dealing with vampires. After taking a few steps in, I saw a man staring at the center of the plot. Mike. His gaze was quite intense, almost grim. I turned to take a look at what he was facing and I almost dropped my gun. There amidst a sea of graves was a man crouched down facing the ground. He seemed to be drawing something on the ground. "Dang it, we're late," Mike muttered. I looked at the graves around me. Each and every one of them had some pentagram drawn on them with blood. I looked at the person a bit closely. The ground around him was colored in a shade of red. What the heck was Pearson up to? I thought he had a clear shot of this area, Mike asked me. He was keeping the other one occupied so that I could get here, I replied. The graveyard is a very dangerous place when fighting against vampires. Their unnatural affinity towards death allows them to use a very rare and dangerous type of dark magic. Ghouls. The second vampire was raising ghouls, counting the number of graves, around 80 of them. A dark malicious aura spread through the air. Its very essence seeped into the soil beneath our feet. A gut-wrenching feeling overcame me as the soil around the graves had started to shift. A hand emerged from one of the graves in front of me. It's already begun, Mike said as he loaded his rifle. I switched my rifle's mag from silver bullets to normal rounds. This is going to be a very long night, I thought to myself. The ghouls randomly rose from their graves. They're basically mindless corpses controlled by their summoner. As such, they compensate for their weakness in their huge numbers. A lone ghoul isn't a threat, but a horde certainly is. Me and my colleagues started firing at the undead corpses. The vampire hadn't moved from its position. He still hadn't summoned all of the ghouls yet. In the meantime, we were able to keep the ghouls at bay. Initially, they never seemed like a threat. The problem is, there's no way to put down a ghoul once it's been summoned. They sustain themselves through their summoner's spirit or something like that. No matter how many times we shoot them down, they just keep getting back up. We were getting pushed back further and further. I was running out of bullets, and it seemed like Mike was too. I was desperately trying to think up something when I heard a soft thud behind me. A footstep. I spun around instinctively, only to be met face to face with a walking corpse. This ghoul had snuck up behind me. I wouldn't have been able to react fast enough, and I thought I was going to die. Before I could do anything though, something pierced through the ghoul's cranium. The ghoul fell down onto the ground. I looked at its head and something was lodged in it. An arrow. It had blue fletching on a brown wooden shaft. The arrowhead was tapered aggressively and ornate with a circular symbol embossed in gold. I looked around trying to figure out where it came from.
Watch your six.
A voice came through my earpiece. Pearson, I cursed under my breath. I didn't see you anywhere close. Where the heck are you? Another arrow came soaring through the sky, hitting a stray ghoul on its head.
You see that giant hill up north?
He said. You do realize that's around 1 kilometer away, right? You gotta be kidding me. Mike retorted as he shot at a few scrambling ghouls. Stop flexing on us with your magecraft.
Wait till you see this.
Pearson smirked as another arrow landed at the center of an impending horde. The next thing I know, the ghouls got engulfed in a fiery explosion. I hate you magic folk, Mike shouted. With Pearson's support, we were able to clear out a lot of the ghouls. I glanced at the vampire still bent over the pentagram. Nothing's going to change unless we kill him. All of a sudden, the vampire got up. It had finished the summoning. He stopped to admire the chaos that he had created. Our gazes met as he turned to face me. I felt a chill run down my spine as his eyes seemingly stared deep into my soul. Without wasting a single moment, he turned tail and started running away. He's trying to run, I screamed into my mic.
I got him,
Pearson called. He shot a silver-tipped arrow straight at his heart. However, the arrow stopped a few inches away from his chest. A black mass, kind of like a shadow, floated in front of his body. The arrow fell to the ground. I aimed at the monster and emptied my clip at it. Nothing. A few metallic clicks confirmed that all my bullets fell to the ground, completely deflected. Pearson tried putting a few more arrows into him, but to no avail. None of us knew what to do. Mike had run out of ammo and the ghouls had started to get up again. The situation was not to our advantage. But then Mike called out to me. Even in the heat of the moment, I could hear him say, "Don't let this go in vain." He started running towards the black mass, and he knew what he was doing. I knew what he was doing. But despite it all, I just stood there watching, not being able to utter a single word. He charged head-on with great valor. As he got within 5 feet, however, he stopped. Blood dripped from the hole in his torso as the shadowy tendril pierced his chest. I heard a click. The pin of a grenade. The ground shook as a violent shock wave rippled through the air. A bright flash blinded my eyes and a thunderous blast echoed in my ears. The dust settled. I glanced at the remains of Mike's final stand. The vampire was flat on the ground, twitching his body all over. Both of his legs were mangled while his arms were blown clean off. I flipped his body on its back. His face matched those of the records. He was the second target, and his name was Jeff. Although his body was blown up at point blank, he could easily regenerate himself if given the time. I pulled out my silver stake. Jeff gave me a menacing stare, and I pointed the stake at his chest. "Do you realize just how many people you've killed in the past few days?" I asked, staring him down. Jeff smirked. "How many breeds have you eaten in your life?" he replied. I shoved the stake straight into his heart. He let out one last groan before going completely limp. I sat down as his body slowly decayed, leaving a huge lump of black ash in its wake. Mike, or rather what was left of him, laid right beside me.
What the heck happened to Mike?
Pearson's voice came through. "Killed in action," was all that I could say. A good minute of silence followed.
"The second guy's in the mansion,"
Pearson spoke. "How can you be so sure?" I asked him.
"I drove him into it,"
he replied.
"Why do you think I ran out of bullets? Also, on a side note, I don't have a lot of arrows left."
"Well, what are you waiting for? Get your butt down here," I told him.
"I'm pretty far away, it'll take a while."
"I don't care," I said. I looked at the pool of Mike's blood spilling from his dislodged torso.
"I'm moving in now. We're going to see this mission through to the end, no matter what. In any case, listen up, I have a plan."
Pearson called. "About time," I replied. I approached the mansion gates. The iron hinges creaked as I pushed it open. The inside of the mansion was pitch black. I switched my goggles to thermal vision mode. Interestingly, vampires are even colder than their surroundings. They have no body heat. Consequently, they don't appear in thermal scans. They can be very hard to detect if you don't know what you're looking for. However, if there's a simple trick that most hunters use, instead of looking for red heat patches, they look for the coldest patches of purple or black to locate vampires. I looked around. There were no immediate threats in my vicinity. I started walking down the hallways. This mansion only had a single story with an attic above it. I decided to clear this level before going up. As I walked down the last hallway, I looked up at the ceiling, a patch of dark purple. I took out an explosive and attached it to the ceiling. The device beeped. I could see the patch move up a bit. I took around 15 steps before pulling out my detonator and pressing the button. Pieces of wood flew all over the place as the ceiling which connected to the first floor had collapsed. I heard a giant thud as a black figure fell down on the hardwood floor. I had used up all my rifle rounds, so I pulled out my Desert Eagle. 3 gunshots resonated in the hallways as I shot at the figure. I looked up to see if I had done any damage. To my surprise, a black shadowy mass hovered before the entity. Oh yeah, both of them are siblings. Of course they have the same type of magic shadow thingies, I thought to myself. I looked at the man. Furious would be an understatement. His eyes screamed murder. I booked it down the hallway back towards the entrance. There was a staircase that led to the upper floor. I ducked into a random room and hid behind some furniture. This guy's name was Jimmy. He was the older brother of Jeff. Jimmy's footsteps continued down the hallway. He turned right onto another hallway which led to the dining hall. I waited another minute to play it safe before booking it back to the entrance. After locating the staircase, I silently began to climb it. I could hear Jimmy cursing and screaming at me for killing his brother downstairs. While he was occupied, I began setting up explosives all over the place. This was the last phase of Pearson's plan. I scanned around in my thermal goggles. This time, though, I was looking for a patch of red. Suddenly, I heard footsteps running up the stairs. I got into position waiting for Jimmy to fall for the trap. The first explosion occurred moments after he got on the upper level. I could hear his screeches intensify as he got more and more upset. I hid in what appeared to be his study. As the seconds passed, Jimmy's footsteps drew nearer. I peeked into the hallway. Even with all the darkness, I saw the outline of a tall humanoid figure. 2 blood-red eyes staring right at me. I instantly closed the door and retreated into the room. Not even a second later, I heard the door smash as Jimmy busted it open with a single kick. I aimed my gun at him and fired. I must have got 7 rounds in before that shadow stopped the rest. Jimmy was beyond consolation at this point. He grabbed me by the collar and threw me across the room. Before I could even process what was going on, I felt his hand grab my leg and throw me into a table. My back crashed against the plywood. The table fell sideways and I rested my head on a big broken piece of it. Using my battered up arms, I sat upright, looking at the vampire. Tears burst out from the psychotic killer's eyes. I watched as the droplets fell on the floor below and evaporated instantly. He did lose his brother after all. Jimmy wiped away his tears, returning his malevolent gaze back to his face. The shadowy mass stretched out to fill the room. They twirled and formed into tendrils as they slithered across the floor straight towards me. As I sat there, I heard a slight tap from behind the section of wood that I was leaning against. The ends of the tendrils sharpened into spears. Jimmy pointed them my way. "Only one of us will die tonight," Jimmy's voice boomed. "No kidding, Sherlock," I replied. I tilted my head towards the right. I heard the shattering of wood behind me as an arrow flew over my left shoulder. It moved so fast that Jimmy had no time to react. Even the shadow thing got torn through by the sheer force of the arrow. The silver-tipped projectile penetrated deep into the vampire's heart. A flash of bright white light illuminated the room. I heard the vampire's screams coupled with a gust of wind. The shadows were purged by the light. 2 hands desperately tried to crawl away from the engulfing light before being vaporized completely. Pearson walked around the broken furniture behind me as a heap of ash settled down on the floor. "I told you to distract him. Now get your butt handed to you," he said, extending his arm to me. I looked at the pile of ash and smoke, taking Pearson's hand. "You're an idiot, you know that,"